Okay, everyone, welcome. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on October 23rd, 2020, the committee resumes its study of the challenges and issues faced by the arts, culture, heritage, and sports sectors during the COVID-19 pandemic. So let's jump into this. We have three witnesses to start. Before I do, I would just like to point something out for my colleagues both here and on Zoom. The official end of this meeting is 1 o'clock Eastern Time. However, anticipate that being stretched to possibly up to 10 minutes. And I say that because in the second hour, we are going to experience undoubtedly some technical issues. I don't want to shortchange the second hour because of technical issues. So from here going forward, meaning next few meetings, especially about this study, anticipate up to 10 minutes extension. I think that's, given the technical situation, runner, I think that's only fair to our witnesses and to you colleagues as well. And I hope that you don't mind. So please plan accordingly in case you want to schedule meetings just after that, I will be looking at up to 10 minutes to extend. Okay. That being said, let's now go back to our study. We have with us from Catherine Cole and Associates, Catherine Cole, Principal Consultant, Regroupement des Festivals Régionaux Artistiques Indépendants. We're looking at Clément Jean Thériault, who's the Director General. And from Réseau Indépendant de Diffuseurs d'Événements Artistiques Unis, I hope I pronounced that somewhat correctly, Julianne Richard, who is the Director General. So, to our guests, to our panelists, you get up to 5 minutes. Sorry, do I see?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Mr. Lewis.
I'm not sure if anyone else is hearing it, but I'm having a lot of difficulty with some sound quality from you and echoing. And I think maybe, judging by others nodding, just so we can fully hear the chair, if that's something that we could address.
By show of hands of those of you on Zoom, are you experiencing the same problem? Ah, yes, near unanimously. We're going to suspend for a couple minutes to see if we can fix and test this, okay? So we'll suspend for just a few minutes, so please stand by for just a few. And I've just received an explanation as to why this is. The audio in the room where I am has been turned up, but it's at a normal volume, which is probably what you're hearing. To remedy that, we are going to try to lower the volume within this room so that you can hear it at a manageable level for those of you zooming in and on this lovely display gallery. So let's get started. And if there are any more difficulties, please just signify with a wave of the hand that you wish to interrupt. So we're going to start with Ms. Cole. Ms. Cole, you have up to 5 minutes for your initial presentation. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Whether or not museum staff have been able to work on site or museums have been able to reopen varies regionally. We don't yet know the full impact of closures on the future of Canadian museums, but it's estimated that 1/3 of all museums in the US and 2/3 in the UK will close permanently. Museums operate on a combination of government investment, earned revenues, and private funding. Their ability to generate revenues is extremely limited at this time. Corporate sponsorships are limited because high-profile activities have been cancelled. Some private funding has been redirected towards pandemic relief. Ironically, the more successful museums have been in reducing reliance on government funding, the more seriously their bottom line has been impacted. Where possible, museum professionals expect to continue working from home part-time post-pandemic. Staff that require regular access to collections or visitors have been laid off, registrars, educators, and sales staff. COVID-19 has discouraged young people working in museums, while some senior staff are retiring early and others may work longer than expected due to loss of retirement savings. Museum closures have interrupted relationships between staff, volunteers, and audiences. Museums work collaboratively in and with communities, and much of this work, particularly in Indigenous and migrant communities, has been disrupted and may need to be rebuilt. Where they've had the capacity to do so, museums have developed digital resources, providing access to collections online, educational programs, virtual tours, etc. When museums in the UK reopened after the first closure, they found that many visitors were new to museums, having discovered them through virtual programming. And where museums have reopened with time tickets, they now have access to a database of visitors that could be used for audience evaluation. But not all Canadians have equal access to digital technology. People living in northern and remote communities do not share the broadband capacity of those of us in southern cities. I work in the Arctic, where meetings are held by teleconference due to poor connectivity. Low-income Canadians do not have internet access at home or multiple computers to allow all family members to go online, as has been demonstrated by the shift to online learning in schools. It is expected that international tourism won't reach 2019 levels until 2023. A survey conducted by Hill Strategies in May indicates that it will also take years for local visitors to return to museums. Only 30% of previous visitors expected to visit immediately when museums and galleries reopen. 15% plan to return between 1 and 5 months after they reopen. 12% plan to wait 6 months or more until a vaccine is available. 42% of visitors were unsure when they will return. A follow-up study in August suggests that exhibiting organizations have lost 63% of their visitation and will not reach 2019 levels until at least 2022. COVID-19 has highlighted other issues that have had an impact on museums. For example, the disparity between rich and poor in society underscores the need for museums to develop programming for marginalized communities. Global social upheaval has reinforced the need for museums to work towards decolonization, respect for human rights, and social justice. In the short term, the museum community would benefit from a dedicated relief fund to support lost revenues and an emergency development fund for digital activities. In the long term, the sector needs more flexible federal funding, like that of the Canada Council, investment in operations, including organizations without staff to allow them to improve sustainability, programming, in addition to collections management and traveling exhibitions, cultural diplomacy through international heritage practice, and the work of individual museum professionals in the gig economy. Globally, nearly 30% of independent museum professionals are considering a change in career due to insecurity. The federal government invests in few of the thousands of museums in Canada. Other levels of government often provide a greater proportion of museum budgets. The only federal funding available to most museums is through Young Canada Works, which, while valuable, could be improved. For example, the 2 years post-graduation and under 30 eligibility criteria do not reflect the reality of the sector. Young adults are often still looking for full-time work years after graduation, and many graduate after the age of 30. The duration of the international internship component, with which I am most familiar, should be extended to 8 months or a year because it takes time to get settled and learn how museums work in another country. As the former Secretary General of the Commonwealth Association of Museums, I've sent interns to the Caribbean, Africa, the South Pacific, South Asia, and the UK, where they've had invaluable experiences that have benefited them personally and Canadian museums as they diversify audiences and welcome migrants and new Canadians. Canadian heritage should focus on the new National Museum Policy, the need for which was identified in this Standing Committee's report moving forward, and included in the Minister's mandate letter. Canadian heritage also has a role to play in response to the Senate report, Cultural Diplomacy at the Front Stage of Canada's Foreign Policy, which largely overlooked the work that organizations like the Commonwealth Association of Museums do, and with investment could contribute to cultural diplomacy. The world will emerge from the pandemic a different place, and Canadian heritage organizations have an opportunity to be part of ensuring that it is a better place. Thank you.
And thank you for that. So we're now going to Mr. Theriot, I hope I pronounced that correctly. I apologize if I did not. For up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for the time you've given me. I'm speaking as a representative of the Regroupement de Festivals Artistiques Indépendants, which has about 80 festivals spread throughout the four corners in Quebec of arts festivals. It is March, and the season of programming announcement is upon us. Organizers from across Quebec have spent the last few months imagining their festival, building it, financing it. Overnight, our beloved industry had to shut down in the midst of great uncertainty. We're the first industry to have closed, and we have been resilient and determined. For most of the arts festivals, the main concerns were maintaining employment, maintaining the knowledge acquired in recent years, in addition to maintaining business relationships with their partners and with funders. The government has been proactive in terms of funding and has set up several programs that have allowed businesses to keep their heads above water. Financial assistance for employees and rent, innovation, assistance funds, emergency, and so on. The government also announced a relaxation in accountability of several programs, including Canadian Heritage and Tourism Quebec. Several members of Refrain have taken advantage of this crisis to reinvent themselves and to test project formulas. The transition towards a digital or hybrid offer, delivery of concerts in front of people's homes, rental of festival infrastructure. And so our members have showed a lot of imagination in continuing to work during this crisis. Some organizations were able to do better than others in the adaptation for different reasons. New festivals, for example, the 2 hours and less, that were not funded by the government, received very, very little assistance in going through this crisis. Organizations with limited structure, volunteer groups have had a lot more difficulty adapting to try to meet the different needs. So the festival, the milieu doesn't always allow for alternative projects and artistic disciplines that are not always recognized at the same level. Several events are fragile, some even risk disappearing. We have lost a lot of resources to the benefit of other groups. Careers have changed, and so there's a major void left. The government support was able to assist us somewhat, but the real challenge is over the next year. In 2021, will determine the future of these festivals, and the government will play a key role. We cannot talk about a recovery period when all signs show that 2021 will be similar to 2020. So these are some of the demands from our group. First of all, a quick confirmation at the start of 2021 as far as federal programs that will be renewed for the next year, and also accelerating response times for funding applications, putting in place 3 to 5 year fundings to allow us to better plan our activities. Special funds for recent festivals, new festivals that are under 3 years old. So some of the special funds that Canadian Heritage has given, a subsidy to support innovative activities similar to SODEC at the provincial level, and also infrastructure and material that will be necessary to meet the health concerns, and also flexibility in the assessment of existing programs. Canadian Heritage has already announced this lowering of the ratio, support from local partners, that have been hard hit by the crisis, and also accepting surpluses generated by some shows during the crisis instead of penalizing them, knowing that these surpluses will make up for the losses, boosting some of the existing envelopes to make up for the loss of independent revenue. The support from the private sector, support from state corporations like Little Quebec, creating programs that will allow the promotion of projects in digital content. So, as you can see, we have, through the contribution of our respondents, there are 60 festivals that took place, that took part in the poll, and we are coming up with concrete solutions that will solve part of the issue and allow us to prepare for a recovery that should occur over the next 2 years. The arts industry is very important. Normally, arts festivals are important in terms of the dynamism of a community, the well-being of a community. So it's important to understand that this industry will be very important at the end of this crisis. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Madame Richard, for 5 minutes. Morning. I'd like to thank the committee for allowing Rideau to express their ideas on the current situation and to think of future perspectives. Rideau has 170 members who manage 350 performance halls spread out over 7 distribution networks throughout Quebec. They have about 3.5 million spectators, representing 1,400 shows a year. So these broadcasters play a key role in the cultural environment. It allows citizens to have access to cultural products that are professional and that are diversified throughout the year and throughout the territory. Our sector is certainly going through the worst crisis ever. In March, it will be 1 year that almost all showrooms have been locked in Quebec. Several organizations, the survival of several organizations is threatened. So the broadcast activities of the Rideau members produces a turnover assessed at about $155 million a year. The business model for this in Quebec is only relies on 5 to 15% on subsidy. The rest comes from independent revenues produced mostly through ticketing and rentals, gifts, and sponsorships. In March, it will be more or less $130 million in independent revenue that flows from different people in Quebec. As far as jobs, the drop in this area was 58.2%, and performing arts dropped by 49.1%. We can see how the situation is still quite dramatic and that the recovery will be long and slow. These figures show that the performing arts and sports entertainment never really recovered from the first wave of the pandemic. In October, the employment was even lower than in April. Compared to last year, the same period, employment is now lower than 32%, so 48,000 workers fewer. And currently, the motivation of working teams, the morale is low, it's hard to retain people, and polls show that if there is no vaccine that is widespread, the public will not be coming back to the shows. Now, the needs identified during the crisis, the most important is predictability. Beyond the shortage in financial resources that has hard hit the artistic world. For broadcasters, it's important to take into account different activities that take place over several months, sometimes even a year. And the marketing of a show has to be done over several months. So the sort of management that has been going on since the start of the crisis makes things very difficult. we know that in our sector, the recovery will be long. So we have concluded that it doesn't matter what assistance measures will be put in place, it must cover at least 2 years to allow the sector to better plan its recovery. So some of the shortcomings identified, the distribution for emergency funds to support organizations in arts and culture and heritage and sports is $500 million. Unfortunately, for multidisciplinary broadcasting, we think that this was a failure. Providing more subsidy to those who already had a lot, we forgot the idea that the smaller organizations were most placed at risk. They have known a 90% drop in revenue. As far as best support, we believe that we should avoid wall-to-wall events such as emergency funds to support organizations. I'm talking here about funding from Music Action and Canadian Heritage. The wage subsidy was very important for us, and I think extending it beyond June 21st, that's fundamental. The recovery, as I said, will be long. So that's the predictability that the milieu calls for. It's very urgent and necessary that investments for Canadian Arts Fund that the federal government has allowed in its 2019 budget that will be coming to an end March 31st, 2021, that this should be made more permanent. As far as infrastructure measures, we've identified a support program for ticketing losses, which with the Quebec government right now. It's the biggest problem we have right now. Tax incentives for gifts and sponsorships. So support for boldness and promotion of shows, and also funds for professional training for our managers that have to manage through very, very difficult periods. Thank you.
We're now going to go to our rounds of question. We're going to start with Mr. Aitchison for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to each of the presenters. That was excellent. I think it feels a bit like what I'm hearing from not just the presenters today, but from multiple presenters that we've had at previous committees, is that many of the programs that the federal government has put in place have helped. They've helped to sort of, just keep the lights on at the very least. There's a definite need to extend some of those programs. But I also have heard a little bit, it feels like, about different programs, and I guess I'm wondering specifically, because recovery will take some time, and I've heard that a number of times as well. If as part of that recovery, there are specific recommendations for any new programs to help, and I'm thinking, I guess maybe specifically, Ms. Cole, about museums. My experience in small town politics, we had a little museum in Huntsville that we were always struggling to make it, I guess, more viable. Are there ideas for new programs to help, I guess, museums specifically maybe adapt to perhaps not just the pandemic, but maybe a new reality for museums in general? I'm wondering if maybe there's a better way to approach government funds for these kinds of things.
Well, thank you for the question. I certainly think there are better ways of going about it. One is just recognition of the fact that this is a 3-tiered funding structure. So it's federal, provincial, and municipal. And they all depend on one another, and yet they don't seem to communicate very effectively between one another. And so we have, each of the programs has different deadlines, they have different reporting requirements. It just makes it way too much work for small museums to participate in all of this when the possibility of return is so low. The federal funding specifically is really limited to very few museums. Most small museums in the country are not eligible for it and would never be able to get any funding from the federal government, except for Young Canada Works. And that just seems to me to be unfair towards the heritage sector, when the arts sector and through the Canada Council, organizations large and small, collaboratives, individuals, everybody can apply. And they don't necessarily have to be arts events that are of national historic significance. So it's a different criterion for the two. And when the last National Museums policy was introduced 30 years ago, it wasn't resourced effectively at the time. And so now we're even that much further back. I mean, 30 years ago was pre-internet. Just think about how much the museum world has changed as a result of that. And yes, there is funding available for digital technology things, but again, that's also very difficult to access. So, I think greater flexibility is absolutely critical to all of this, and less reporting. I mean, Young Canada Works, the amount of reporting you have to do for that is just ridiculous. And so much of it is repetitive that it's a huge amount of work. The other issue is that a lot of these small community museums, they're as much senior centers and drop-in centers as they are museums. They play a really strong and important role within the community as a place for people to, acknowledge their heritage, to have a sense of identity, to have a sense of belonging, all of that. But they don't necessarily meet the international standards of museum professionals, and so they're being judged for something that they're not even trying to be, and again, that's also an unfairness issue. The other thing that I'm very concerned about is the whole nature of volunteerism, which I know is much bigger than this committee, but I think our current board structure is failing. It's failing in the arts. It's failing in heritage. It's failing all over the place because too much is expected of board members and volunteers. And, again, society has changed so much in the last 30, 40 years that we no longer have that kind of time to dedicate to these organizations. And the expectation is that volunteers will just pick it up. And I'm afraid that after the pandemic, volunteers won't be there to pick it up. And that's one of my biggest concerns, really. It's not a money issue, but it's a governance issue.
Thank you for that. I honestly, I'm wondering if you could expand a little more on volunteerism. Have you got some thought? I mean, that's something that I haven't heard yet, but you're right that there's a generational, I think, gap in some ways when it comes to volunteerism. I think about smaller rural communities as well, where it was far more common and it's less common now. Have you got some thoughts on what we might do with governance of these smaller museums, like Muskoka Pioneer Village in Huntsville, for example?
Yeah, well, I think that the expectation is that the boards will provide that governance function and the accountability, right? They're there sort of as a buffer for the government to know that the money's not being just walked away, and people are behaving appropriately. But the actual professional standards in this field are incredibly high, and the risk and liability issues are very high. And it's really too much for volunteers to take on. What is the solution? I've been struggling with that for a long time. When I was Secretary General of the Commonwealth Association of Museums, it was a volunteer role. So for 7.5 years, I was running an international development organization on top of my consulting practice. And I just got burned out. I mean, there's only so many weeks, and I'm sure you as MPs experience this, but there's only so many weeks in a row you can work 90 hours without feeling it. And so I honestly don't know what the answer is, but I think, smaller boards, more funding to be able to hire paid staff. I mean, most of these very small museums that we're talking about have no paid staff during the winter, which is when most museums that are seasonal institutions are trying to raise the money, right? That's when you're doing your program planning and developing new activities and raising money. But what these programs tend to fund is people to mow the lawn and keep the doors open.
Thank you, Mrs.
So none of that.
Sorry, I have to stop it right there. We've run our time at 6 minutes. I apologize. Monsieur Lauzon, bienvenue.
Thanks.
Pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais remercier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you for everything. Arts and culture are important for the government. Mr. Turgeon-Thériault, thank you for reminding us of the programs implemented by the government. When we're facing a pandemic, it's always hard to know what to do. Now, I'd like you to talk about the sponsorships linked to independent festivals and small festivals. How is the relationship with such sponsorships, and how are you affected? Yes, we were already hard hit last summer. It was less worse last summer. At the time, we didn't realize the impact of COVID-19. That being said, last summer, some events lost 100% of their sponsorships. I also represent festivals in rural regions. Companies are really fragile in those remote areas. We can already see that some sponsorship cannot fund any events. And for them, the priority is not sponsorship, but being able to pay their own staff. We are also thinking that some Loto Quebec companies are also key sponsorships, but we're thinking that maybe they won't be able to keep funding events. We know that there are also big companies that fund events, but due to COVID-19, they might not be able to keep doing that. And that is a big loss for us because we have already lost 80% of tickets. During the pandemic, we cannot sell any beer, which is also another source of income. Yeah, and that's also one of my questions. Could you please provide more details about the different sources of income, apart from income coming from the beer and income from tickets? Municipalities are helping you when it comes to fund. In your case, the government of Quebec as well can help. But now, I'd like you to let us know what would be the best solution to relaunch the economy and festivals. So to answer quickly to the first question, to see how incomes have been affected, our festival in Baie Saint-Paul, we have base revenue coming from the sale of beers. In Baie Saint-Paul, we also organize camping settlement, so that's also another source of income. But unfortunately, we've been losing this type of revenue. There's also revenue coming from food that we've been losing. As for short-term solutions, there are many of them. For instance, I was talking about the SODEC program. Many festivals have applied for that program. And this program asks event organizers to rethink their festivals. Therefore, we organize micro-festivals, festivals with limited capacities, and that funding helped us to stay afloat. There was also a ticketing program that helped us to offset the loss of ticket sales. And it's about adjusting a top-up percentage based on the percentage of loss of ticket sales. Maybe the government could suggest a top-up percentage. And as for new festivals, those who didn't have access to Canadian Heritage funding, maybe another type of funding could be available for them. The emergency help implemented by Canadian Heritage has been very helpful, so it's very important to keep it. Another idea, offsetting loss of revenues for private companies. I think it's important to keep analyzing everything. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to know, Mr. Lauzon.
Perhaps you get some time later. Monsieur Champoux, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Champoux, 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to split my time with Madame Debian, if you're okay with that. Thank you. Thank you, all witnesses, for appearing today and talking about this important topic. Ms. Richard, in your remarks, you talked about the $500 million fund from the government that didn't get through to everybody. Multidisciplinary broadcasters get funding through another player. However, the amount of funding they get are very low. Oh, the interpreter flags that the connection of Ms. Richard is not stable. Canadian Heritage decided to top up all funding by 25%, but that funding and top-up would be available only for organizations that were already benefiting from Canadian Heritage funds. So if that's your case, then great, you get 25% more of funding. But some companies were not as lucky. When the amount of funding only represents 2 to 3% of your total revenue, it's very difficult when you don't benefit from the top-up. So a major broadcaster received 0.5% from the emergency help implemented by Canadian Heritage. And that broadcaster has been hard hit by the pandemic. I think it's been very hard for broadcasters. Do you think that broadcasters will be able to stay afloat? What should we be doing in the next month? How can we ensure sustainable funding for all the players in the industry? Do you think that some outcomes could be avoided for those broadcasters? Amounts that were distributed were between $16 and $18 million during 2 fiscal years. And right now, companies do not know if those funding are going to be renewed. And yet many broadcasters are heavily relying on those fundings. And some broadcasters hadn't been able to get access to the funding because they didn't meet all the criteria, because their revenues were too low. The wage subsidy was really helpful for broadcasters. The subsidy helped broadcasters to keep their staff. Now, we know that a wage subsidy has been extended until June 2021. However, it would be great if this wage subsidy would adapt according to the recovery pace of each sector. We know that some sectors have been benefiting from the recovery. But for the arts, many players haven't been able to fully reopen, if not at all. So this is why the wage subsidy should be applied according to everybody's criteria. All right, so you're talking about measures that are necessary for the recovery. You talked about supporting creativity and originality and boldness. Yes. When you work in a multidisciplinary area, such as music, dance, etc., well, the business model is that we need big events that will ensure a certain level of revenues so that companies can stay afloat. And in the next few years, some players may need some support programs that are focused on creativity and innovation to help them ease the financial burden. Thank you. It's very interesting. Madame Desbiens is going to ask her questions. Thank you, colleague. Thank you, witnesses. Mr. Turgeon, we talked about predictability. Now, I'd like to hear you about the impacts of festivals in rural regions, on tourism. Well, festivals in rural regions have a lot of impact. There is a lot of there's a lot of revenues from festivals in rural regions. But our festival in Baie-Saint-Paul is like a way to promote a region. Many young people attend the festival and also discover the region at the same time, and then they're enticed to go back. It has been the case in our festival in Baie-Saint-Paul. Some people attended our festival in the summer, and now they were so charmed by the area that they decided to go back there for their winter vacation. Festivals are also a source of pride for local inhabitants. Dozens and dozens of volunteers are helping us every year. Young students also do the internships through the arts. So festivals are mobilizing local communities. Many festivals do business with local businesses, such as beer producers and such. Sorry.
Mr. Turgeon, Ontario. Sorry about that. Ms. McPherson, for 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, it's lovely to be recognized.
I'm not going to live this down, am I?
Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. It's been very interesting and informative to hear from you. I have a few questions. I want to thank Ms. Cole for joining us today and speaking so strongly about the needs of museums, particularly museums that are in smaller communities that are run by volunteers. Ms. Cole, you also spoke about the audience collaboration, I guess, being disrupted. In particular, I'm interested on what the impacts of that would be in those communities that you talked about that don't have access to strong enough technology, I guess. So could you discuss a little bit of how COVID-19 has had this deep impact on Indigenous communities, on remote communities, and what you think those rebuilding initiatives should look like?
Thank you for the question. I'm working on the planning a feasibility study for the Nunavut Heritage Centre in Iqaluit, and we have been unable to do any community consultation related to that project, aside from telephone calls. And excuse me. It's really important to bring people together in a room and to have the elders speak to the community members and to have people listen to what they have to say and to think about how to move the project forward. And that's just something that's not able to happen right now. Communities are extremely protective of their elders, and as you know, a lot of Indigenous communities are in dire straits. None of it has just been really hard hit in the last few weeks, and I understand the breakout in Rankin Inlet occurred because they were medevacing somebody from Arviat who had to stay in Rankin for several hours at the airport and then infected people in Rankin on the way out. So these are really, really fragile communities. And they were fragile before. The loss of traditional culture among Inuit people it's a really serious emergency situation for Canada. And the importance of these heritage centres, and one just opened in Labrador, another one is under development in Labrador, ours in Nunavut. These centres have much like in small rural communities that we were talking about before, but they have a really important role in terms of coalescing the sense of community identity and pride and connecting people to the world. So one of the things we've been talking about developing virtual educational programming for the schools, but their schools haven't been able to go online. The teachers in their schools are writing up assignments and the kids come into the school and pick them up and take them home to do. They don't have computers at home. They don't have that kind of access. So it's really easy for us in the South to just say, well, just go online. It just doesn't happen that way. So it's a very dire situation. And I know the federal government has announced some funding for additional infrastructure for Indigenous centres, and we're hoping we'll be able to access that for our centre. But then, of course, it's the operating funding that will always be difficult to get.
Challenge. Yeah. And one of the things that you also talked about is the idea of the challenges of accessing that funding and how the reporting is onerous, the standardization amongst the different levels of government is onerous. Could you speak a little bit on what your recommendations would be for us to put forward, for the federal government to put forward on that?
Well, I just think we need to streamline things as much as possible. Obviously, we need accountability. I'm not questioning that. But I was talking to a colleague last week who said for the emergency funding, she said it took her literally like 20 minutes to fill in the form to get a huge whack of money compared to what it takes for us to get the 30,000 to hire 2 interns through Young Canada Works. The emergency funding has rolled out quickly and relatively easily for people. Why is the ongoing funding so difficult?
Well, I have to tell you, as someone who's worked in the charitable sector for decades, I can say that is not the only federal funding that is onerous to access.
No. Well, they all are. And and to be honest, it's not just federal funding either. I mean, I was doing a focus group with people in BC once about their arts funding, and one of the people in the focus group said we might as well fill in the application in our own blood. And the person who hired me to do the work asked me to take that line out. And I said, well, she said it. This is how people feel about how onerous the reporting structures are. So it just needs to be simplified.
And I think that's maybe one of those silver linings from COVID-19 is that we now know that it is possible to do this in a way that is less onerous on particularly small organizations, particularly volunteer-run organizations.
Absolutely, and I mean, my comment about not needing to have full-time paid staff to be able to apply for some of these things. The first time I applied to the Museums Assistance Program for the Commonwealth Association of Museums, I was able to apply for it. But the second time, they put in a rule that you had to have full-time paid staff in order to apply. I mean, that was just deliberately shutting us out of that program.
And being particularly onerous, yeah. Well, and you talked about
impossible because we didn't have full-time paid staff, so we couldn't apply. Or the people who say you have to have an audit. Well, if your budget is $75,000 a year and you have to pay $5,000 of it for an audit, that's just disproportionate to how much money you have. So you need to have reviews in those situations, not full audits. It's just that kind of flexibility.
Very easy fixes, it seems, too, as well. Mm-hmm. Well, very quickly, one of the last questions, and I know I don't have very much time, is you talked about volunteers and what we could do for volunteers to make sure that they are better supported. Would an insurance, would the federal government providing some sort of an insurance program, would that be useful? Would that be helpful?
Yes, that would be helpful. I know the Canadian Museums Association does provide a lower rate of insurance for board members, but even that is prohibitively expensive for some people. And I know of situations, I was on a theater board before, but where people came in to join the board, found out what the situation was, and walked out of the meeting and said, "I'm sorry, but I can't be a part of this. It's just too risky." So we shouldn't. I know people who have put their own personal line of credit on the line for the organization. That's too much.
This is unsustainable. Thank you, Ms. Cole. I think I'm probably out of time, but from one Edmontonian to another, Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McPherson. Mr. Waugh for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. You know, today is the economic update by the federal government, and we all know they're well into $300 billion since COVID hit, and we're probably headed to 400 billion. So when I hear funding for 2 years, 3 to 5 years, you all know that the federal government and taxpayers will have a profound change heading out of COVID, without question. I see it here in the Saskatchewan with the museums that are struggling. There's no, I mean, every arts and culture sector in this country is struggling. I'll start first with you, Mr. Turgeon-Thériault. 80 festivals in Quebec, and you had some very good numbers on the rent and wage subsidy. And a lot of these festivals, as you know, kind of shut down in 2019 in the fall when they were done. And it could be 2 years now before they resurrect themselves because they didn't have 2020. And so your base is gone. You know, you talked about sponsorship. Companies will definitely be looking at ways to reinvent themselves as we go forward. So this is really a serious situation that you have, because you do a lot of beautiful rural festivals in Quebec, and that's where the culture, and as you well know, in Quebec is the most important, and we're losing the younger group that I think that needs to experience what culture is all about, and we haven't had it for over a year, maybe 2 years in some cases, and maybe just talk about that if you don't mind.
Yes, certainly. What I feel like answering from the outset is that we feel it is possible to have festivals in 2021. What we feel is not possible is to have the festivals be just as they were in 2019. These huge ticket offices and free shows, and people who would come without any bracelets to be let in and so on. What we need for 2021 is for the government to have very, very soon to sit with the various main people responsible for these big events and to give us some decisions for 2021 and how we can have a season and save 2021. But we need clear direction from the government so that we know for next summer, for instance, that will probably be allowing bigger crowds, 200 people, for instance, as long as they're 2 meters from each other. We can show creativity. We're in the sector, so we can, once we know what to expect, we can have these festivals. And I agree with you, losing 1 year is extremely difficult. Losing 2 would be absolutely worse, and we will lose some resources that are there. They're the people who are knowledgeable about the events. For instance, someone who's used to working for sponsorships, well, if they decide to leave because there's not enough work, this is a huge resource that we're losing that would help in funding the event, and then that wheel just keeps turning. But I wanted to say this quickly. My colleagues, I think, in all events are going to agree. We need to have some clear direction from the government as to how to go about it. Usually at this time of the year, I have 70% of my programming confirmed. My partners are already on board. I already have some confirmations from Quebec. Now I have none of that. I have one artist who is confirmed, and that's it. I'm going to need help from the government so that we can start to get going and we can make sure that we save the season in 2021.
Announced 500 million, and 72 million went to sport organizations, and I believe they still have 18 million, at least when the minister came to committee about a month ago. They still have $18 million out of the 500 million they wanted to disperse. Out of the 500 million then, how much did your organization and your people get out of that 500 million? Do you know offhand?
I couldn't give you an exact amount, unfortunately. I can speak about my own personal organization, maybe. We received the emergency help from Heritage Canada, and honestly, it wasn't enough to make up for all of these various issues. So I couldn't tell you because it may be a good question for Madame Richard as well for the rooms and for the losses for ticketing, which hasn't affected festivals directly in that way yet, but it would be interesting to know how that's happening with the various venues. But provincially, we've received maybe more funds from the provincial level. For our part, most festivals have received more funding for various initiatives from the provincial level than from the federal level. Thank you.
Move on from here. Mr. Housefather, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much to all the witnesses, and I'm going to be sharing the last minute of my time with Mr. Brusen. What I think I heard from each and every one of you is that the programs that we need to provide for financing have to be programs that are sustainable for at least 2 years, preferably longer, for all of your industries, museums, theaters, and festivals to get back on track. J'aimerais commencer.
I'd like to start with Mr. Turgeon-Thériault. First of all, congratulations for the Festif de Pays Saint-Paul. I didn't know that you had founded this festival, but it's quite an asset for Charlevoix. It's extraordinary. I think that you had 70 musicians there last time. It's really wonderful. So I understand. I know what you do in your own festival, but the other festivals that you represent, some of them this is a new group that you created this year. Why did you decide during COVID to come together? And are these all outdoor festivals with musicians and so on? Yes, our regroupement, Refrain, was created during the pandemic, and it was Patrick Goyer who founded a festival in Montreal who decided to do that. At the outset, it was really a discussion group among about a dozen festivals. We were trying to share best practices. We were talking about the issues we were facing and talking about the new funding measures in our regions. And quickly, we understood that we needed to become a group of 80 festivals. Of course, I represent music festivals, but there are all sorts of different festival literatures, theater, science and leisure as well. It really is very, very broad. And festivals that are inside indoor venues and outdoors. And Montreal is a region, so that was a region with and there are festivals in Quebec and Montreal and so on inside in the cities, about 80 festivals, and some of them have existed for longer, such as ours. Some are more recent. And then we have an executive committee, and we have a committee every 2 weeks, every month. We meet with all 80 festivals, and we talk about government announcements. We talk about the structures, how to ask for funding for those newer festivals, and how to ask for funding from governments. We're also going to develop portals so that we can promote all of these various activities. That's extraordinary. And what I feel is very important, and it's not so much the federal, is to have health measures so that we know for next summer what to expect, so that the outdoor festivals at least know that they should what they should look for. And I'd like to ask Madame Richard as well, because I understand those shows, theater and so on, but I think you represent 170 organizations, and you have about 200 rooms, venues.
Que l'été prochain, si vous avez des mesures sanitaires qui sont connues maintenant, que vous pourriez réouvrir, parce que je connais que ça traîne beaucoup.
I know that it costs a lot to put on such a show. It takes about a year to plan. I'm not sure. Could you describe the process? Certainly, most of the 350 rooms that are members of Rideau, they go mostly from September till the beginning of May, end of May, start of June. Some will have a more specific in the summer, but it's a minority of our broadcasters that can do so in the summer. That's why the little window we had last summer did not really affect our members. They were restructuring and they were planning their fall that unfortunately did not bear the expected fruits. For next summer, I have more hope. It will be much better planified. We believe that the real recovery in activities will be around September 2021, as far as our members are concerned.
Thank you. Merci à tout le monde parce que.
Thank you all. I think it's very interesting listening to all of you.
Begin with Ms. Cole, please. And it's been great to see you again and to talk with you about museums. You talked about volunteer museums and small organizations. And I was wondering if you've had a chance to touch base. I understand that 72, right, I'll try and do it this way quickly. 72 small museums and heritage organizations did receive emergency funding, including Natashquan has a small organization, Star City Heritage Museum in Saskatchewan, Elnoran District Museum in Alberta. The small museums that became eligible for emergency funding through an expanded museum assistance program for emergency funding that allowed for seasonal museums and for ones that only had volunteers. Can you perhaps let me know, have you had a chance to touch base and see how that was received?
I have spoken to colleagues who have received the funding, and that was the example I was giving where it was very easy to get the money, and so that was great. The only concern is how long that funding will last. And as my colleagues in the performing arts were saying, this is just the beginning, really, in terms of the recovery period. So it's necessary to do it again and again for the next couple of years. But yes, it was very welcomely received.
Okay, unfortunately, I have to cut it right there. Thank you, Ms. de Bruzen, and thank you to our panelists today, Madame Richard, Monsieur Turgeon-Thériault, as well as Ms. Cole. Thank you for joining us, folks. We're going to try to make this as seamless as possible to our next panel, so we're going to suspend for a few minutes, and thanks again to our witnesses. Of course, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the motion adopted by the committee of October 23rd, the committee resumes its study of the challenges and issues faced by arts, culture, heritage, and sports sectors during COVID-19 pandemic. At this point, we have three guests with us, three different organizations. We have from Arts Commons, Alex Sarian, who's President and Chief Executive Officer. From the Canadian Association for the Performing Arts, Frédéric Julien, Director, Research and Development, and Participation. I hope I pronounced this correctly. It's Elio Antunes. I see by the nod, I'm in the right ballpark. Okay, good. He is the President and Chief Executive Officer. Now, the way we normally do this is you get up to 5 minutes to start your presentation. I say up to. You don't have to use the whole 5, but I will be a little bit lenient, only by just a little bit. So, up to 5 minutes. We're going to start with Mr. Sarian from Arts Commons.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the Canadian arts and culture sector. Before I start, I want to express my gratitude to the Government of Canada for your support of our sector, most notably programs such as the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy have allowed organizations like ours to navigate the pandemic. I'll speak more on this later, but I wanted to start by expressing our immense gratitude. As a citizen of this country who recently returned to Canada after 35 years of living abroad, I'm humbled by the committee's invitation to participate in today's session. It is my privilege to represent Arts Commons, the largest arts center in Western Canada and the nation's third largest arts facility. Occupying more than 560,000 square feet in downtown Calgary, Arts Commons stewards an artistic ecosystem that consists of 6 resident companies, each a world-class institution that contributes to the cultural fabric of Canada. Under more traditional circumstances, Arts Commons hosts approximately 1,800 events per year, welcoming 600,000 visitors of all ages and partnering with more than 200 local community groups. Our focus on collective impact allows me to speak to you today on behalf of a vibrant community of artists, arts professionals, and audiences that continue to struggle in the absence of in-person cultural experiences that remind us of our shared humanity. This is a community that recognizes that while science will get us out of this pandemic, it is the arts that will get us through it. I am also personally honored to be in your presence. As the husband of a veteran New York City public school teacher, and in my role overseeing all global education and community engagement programs at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts before starting my tenure at Arts Commons, it is my core belief that one of the strongest ways for arts organizations to remain relevant is by embracing our civic responsibilities, and there has never been a more urgent time to do that than now. Understanding how we intersect with areas such as creative youth development, mental health, tourism, economic revitalization, just to name a few, allows us to measure our impact on society and reposition ourselves as massive contributors to the social economic recovery of our nation. But while the pandemic has made clear that this civic call to action is necessary, it has also reminded us of the fragility of our sector. The financial implications of the pandemic are considerable. Financial oversight is and will continue to be extremely critical. However, that oversight cannot just focus on business results, but on our ability to operate compassionately as well, which is why Arts Commons has been active while we remain closed to the public, developing new programs and investing in our infrastructure and future. Now, the business model needed to support a thriving arts organization has never been a simple one, and at Arts Commons, we are critically aware of managing risk. In fact, in February, we moved quickly to implement our existing risk management plan. But what the plan could never have predicted, however, was the magnitude and duration of the pandemic. The financial impact to our operations were significant, including over 41% loss in earned revenues for our 1920 fiscal year alone. Now, despite this projection, we chose to not make quick decisions around cutting expenses in the short term. Instead, we focused on 3 primary objectives. 1, remaining a values-led institution. 2, protecting and retaining staff. And 3, focusing on the future. While our goal was to manage the crisis, ultimately, the question that guided all of our decisions was, will we be able to reopen by focusing on the right priorities, keeping our people safe, and preparing for a future that will need the arts more than ever? Over the last 10 months, we have built reopening scenarios, researched government support programs, and drafted budget forecasts countless times. Through our efforts, we've accomplished many successes, but I'd like to call your attention to 4 of them. 1, we have retained 93% of our salaried staff at full pay and kept them engaged in the maintenance of our facilities, the creation of new programs, and the development of reentry and reopening protocols. Keeping our core staff employed was made possible by the federal government's Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy programs, resulting in recoveries of over $1 million. 2, we provided our casual staff with a week's pay following our closure and provided them with access to our Employee Family Assistance Program, giving them access to free confidential services on topics such as health and wellness, financial planning, mental health wellness, and counseling. 3, we supported our resident companies by waiving all venue occupancy fees from April to August, saving them nearly $500,000. While this meant revenue loss to Arts Commons, we have been able to recover just over $298,000 through the Canadian Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance Program. And 4, not only did we pay all artists the full value of the contracts that could not be fulfilled for the remainder of our season, but we hired more artists and technical support staff in the creation of new programs that allowed us to remain connected to our audiences in safe ways while supporting local freelancers who were most impacted by the loss of opportunities in the gig economy. I am proud of how Arts Commons has navigated this pandemic to date, and I am grateful to all orders of government for their support. With that said, the ongoing effects of the pandemic are deteriorating our ability to generate any earned revenue during our current fiscal year. And it is clear that we are running a marathon when what we trained for was a sprint. It is with this in mind that I humbly urge the committee to consider the following 3 things. The first is to continue supporting organizations most impacted by ongoing closures through the continued extensions of programs such as the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy. The second is to recognize in the development of these programs that not all businesses will resume at the same speed, and to work closely with performing arts centers to create ongoing sector-specific supports as the timing for the reopening of our facilities remain unknown.
I apologize. I think you had a third. Can you very quickly say the third thing? Because I'm in a position of sprinting, not marathoning when it comes to this clock.
Absolutely. And the third is to work closely with our organizations to reimagine a more sustainable future. In particular, Arts Commons. We recently announced the design phase of the Arts Commons Transformation Project, which would launch next year and provide Canada Canada would be the first country to have the first performing arts center to be designed since the pandemic started. We have wonderful commitment from municipal and our provincial governments, and we are looking for this committee's support as we continue discussions with the federal infrastructure ministry.
Thank you, and I'm not cutting you off because of content. It's only because of the clock. Mr. For up to 5 minutes, please. I think you're still on mute.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for opportunity to appear before the committee today. So no matter what Statistics Canada indicator you look at, live performance industries are the furthest away from recovery. As a matter of fact, they haven't even begun the recovery. According to the labor force survey, the broader arts, entertainment, and recreation sector lost 37 jobs in October alone. But let's zoom in and have a look at the performing arts, spectator sports, and related industries. As the charts in our reference document show, the performing arts and spectator sports subsector never recovered from the first wave of the pandemic. In October, employment in this subsector was even lower than in April. Compared to last year at the same period, employment is now 32% lower. That's 48,000 live event workers. Performing arts companies are the hardest hit among the hardest hit industries. Data for this industry group is now getting so sparse that it must be interpreted with caution. But if the figures I was sent by Statistics Canada are accurate, then almost 3 in 4 performing arts workers had lost their job in October compared to last year at the same period. Sorry. Participation in the labor force is also declining. which suggests a migration of the workforce to other sectors. The labor force had shrunk by more than 20% in October. This subsector risks facing a major shortage of skilled workers when live performance activities resume. GDP statistics are equally troubling. In spite of modest growth over summer months, the GDP of the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector in August was 52% lower than a year ago. In comparison, the accommodation and food services sector was 33% lower than last year. We've heard from restaurant owners how they need almost a full week to get their supply chain in motion after a shutdown order is lifted. In the live performance sector, it's a matter of 2 to 3 months. The critical path for resuming a live performance series involves several activities: negotiating and signing contracts with performers, booking tech crew and front of house staff, promoting the event, selling tickets for at least 4 weeks, and finally holding the event. If the vaccination campaign goes well, some small-scale festivals may be allowed to take place during the summer months, but the real recovery of this sector will only begin in September 2021, when theaters, concert halls, and performing arts companies launch their fall and winter seasons. This is a long time without much earned revenues. The recovery of the sector will also be a slow one. Under normal circumstances, national and international tours are planned and booked 18 to 24 months in advance. So this is the time frame for the recovery of the sector. Lifting of restrictions plus at least 18 months. Let's turn to gaps. Venues owned by municipalities and education institutions are not eligible for the wage subsidy or the new rent subsidy. As a result, most have had to permanently lay off staff. These publicly owned venues are a strategic part of the performing arts value chain. They serve as midpoints in touring circuits that also involve not-for-profit presenters in rural and more remote areas. Their participation in national tours makes the difference between a tour that is financially viable and one that doesn't reach the break-even point. Passez maintenant au français pour considérant l'état de dévastation dans le...
Looking at the devastation in which the sector finds itself today, the reconstruction of the arts sector requires a holistic policy based on several measures. The government must make sure that they support all those in the value chain. So long as the emergency phase lasts, the government should continue to give emergency and targeted support measures that specifically target the industry has to be put in place. This could include funding for creativity, tours, and performances, and they could assist the sectors in adapting to changes in their customer behavior, supply of assistance for labor, and activities that can generate independent revenues. As far as existing programs, we must remember that investments over 2 years provided by the federal government in the 2019 budget will expire March 31st, 2021. It's the Canadian Fund for the Arts, the Community Development Program through Arts and Heritage, and the Musical Fund of Canada. This funding has to be extended. The government has to consider these programs as recovery tools and give additional money. Organizations that operate the showrooms will require to invest in infrastructure to update them and taking into account the risk associated with COVID and other pandemics that will come. Thank you for your attention.
Monsieur Julien, and up next, well, here's an organization that's no stranger to anybody in this country now, is it? Participation. National, talk about national reputation. My goodness, you're up there with Hockey Night in Canada or the Soirée du Hockey. So, Monsieur, Mr. Antunes, did I pronounce that correctly?
That is correct, yes.
All right, you have the floor, sir, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today, and also appreciate the recognition that our brand has with the committee. Since 1971, actually, Participation has been working toward a Canada where physical activity is a vital part of everyday life. As Canada's leading physical activity organization, we deliver innovative engagement initiatives and thought leadership activities to help Canadians be more physically active and less sedentary, no matter where they live, work, or play. Participation is part of what is often referred to as the SPAR sector, which stands for Sport, Physical Activity, and Recreation. This includes organizations at the national, provincial, territorial, and municipal levels working together to promote participation in physical activity and sport. There are over 33,000 SPAR organizations in Canada. of which 71% are community organizations like the local YMCA or hockey association or curling club that are such an essential part of our collective social fabric, delivering programs and helping build strong communities. The pandemic has left its mark on virtually every aspect of our lives, and the thousands of organizations I speak of are no exception. From the 2020 Olympic Games to the local soccer league, there have been widespread cancellations and suspensions of programs and events, affecting not only revenues, but the ability for Canadians to participate. The results from a recent national survey of SPAR organizations indicate a dire need for support. 99% of these organizations have been affected by COVID, and 21% may not recover without additional support, resulting in less opportunities for community programming. Programs that once may have had thousands of eager Canadians waiting to join are now running at an average capacity of 45%. And almost a quarter of the organizations in our sector are not currently delivering any programming at all. The relief measures provided to date have been pivotal to the continued survival of so many of us in the sector, and we thank the government for its support. However, 65% of local community clubs and associations have not been able to access emergency funding. As important as it is to consider the impact of COVID on organizations, we must not forget its overwhelming effect on individual Canadians. Physical activity levels have endured significant and sustained decline since the pandemic was declared, an unintended consequence of abiding by public health guidelines and the resulting closure of suspended facilities and programs across the country. This past April, in the midst of the pandemic surge, less than 3% of Canadian children were meeting recommendations for physical activity, sedentary behavior, and sleep, a stark contrast to the already low 15% doing so before the health crisis. Canadian adults are not faring any better. Since March, many of the daily rituals that were the foundation for much of our incidental movement, like commuting, grabbing a coffee, or walking to a meeting, have been reduced or eliminated, resulting in incidental physical activity, which is the majority of activity we get each day, remaining alarmingly low. And not surprisingly, more than 60% of Canadians report spending more time using the internet and watching TV during the pandemic. We're significantly increasing our unhealthy sedentary behaviors. The pandemic and its resulting restrictions on social and economic life have also had widely reported impact on mental health, with over half of Canadians reporting worsening mental health as a result of COVID. There is well-documented evidence linking the benefits of physical activity to mental health, such as decreased anxiety and depression, improved resiliency, and lower stress. Unfortunately, however, most Canadians are not engaging in physical activity and sport participation as a coping strategy. The pandemic is also deepening pre-existing inequities. Significantly fewer individuals belonging to visible minority groups are physically active compared to those identifying as Caucasian. Further, only 6% of girls versus 13% of boys are meeting physical activity guidelines. Considering the research overwhelmingly supports the positive association between physical activity and various facets of health, including mental health, it's essential for the Government of Canada to recognize the powerful role that physical activity and sport participation can play in our collective efforts to help Canadians recover from the impacts of COVID. We therefore recommend two key initiatives. The first is the delivery of a national public education campaign to motivate and support Canadians to get outdoors and be active while still abiding by public health guidelines. Different jurisdictions are finding it challenging to navigate public health requirements of distancing while promoting the importance of staying active. There is a need for consistent and clear messaging on how physical activity can be done safely, as well as highlighting its mental health benefits. The second recommendation would be to declare June 2021 as Canada Moves Month, where sport, physical activity, and recreation organizations at the community level are encouraged and resourced to provide free programming during the month as part of Participaction's existing Community Better Challenge, an annual initiative to find and recognize the most active communities in Canada. The spring of 2021 will be time to bring the country together, connect with one another, and celebrate our communities while charting a path forward beyond COVID-19. It is also Participaction's 50th anniversary, an ideal opportunity to help celebrate an iconic Canadian brand by helping us do what we do best, encouraging Canadians to get healthy and get active. Canada Moves would allow families and vulnerable groups to experience sport and physical activity programs without having affordability as a barrier to participation. It would help stimulate re-engagement in local sport and physical activity programs by enabling community organizations to retain members and continue to deliver essential programming. Essentially, we would provide 2,500 community organizations with grants to offer free programming for the entire month. COVID-19 is more than a generational health and economic crisis. Our government should be commended for its efforts in mitigating the spread of the virus while protecting the livelihood of everyday Canadians. But we need to work just as hard to address the enormous social impact this pandemic has had on our communities. Now more than ever, physical activity and sport participation needs to be promoted and prioritized to help Canadians stay healthy in mind, body, and community spirit. Thank you.
And thank you, sir. So let's go straight to the questions. Mr. Shields, you have up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for all the witnesses being on here today. Participation, I totally agree. The students that stayed home for months on end, this is a serious problem. The program that was involved in schools for many years, participation, it was dropped, and I don't know why it was dropped out of the school system, but that's a challenge. Mr. Sarian, welcome to Arts Common. That's a great part of the Calgary art scene, the Canadian art scene. Fantastic place in theater. One of my former students from a university class, Craig Hall, is director of
Mr. Shields.
Arts Common.
We'll just stop the clock for you right there. Mr. Brusen has a point of order.
I'm really sorry, Mr. Shields. This isn't. It's not about your question. It's that the sound is really hard on the ears. Like I don't know how it is.
I think it might be the same. Sorry, Mr. Brusen, were you done? Yeah. I think it might be the same problem we had prior. I'm going to get Mr. Shields to move just a little bit farther away from his microphone, and maybe we could lower the volume within this room because Mr. Shields is in this room right now with us. Okay? Please proceed, sir. Thank you, Mr. Brusen.
Thank you, Mr. Brusen. Sorry to have been so loud. As we often are told, lean into the mics, right? All right, now back off. All right, thanks. Anyways, Arts Common, Mr. Sarian, thank you for joining Arts Common. Welcome back to Calgary. It's a fantastic art scene. Craig Hall, director of Vertigo Theatre, former student and class of mine in university. It's a great place. Introduced my kids to arts and the Arts Common and many events that we've attended there over the years. So I want to go back to your last 3 points. I think you were just getting into those last 3 points. And the last one in particular that you didn't have time for, the future that you're looking forward to. Could you spend a little more time? You could spend time in 1 and 2, and I think we know those ones. But number 3, can you talk to us about number 3 on your future plans, where you're going?
Absolutely, and thank you for giving me the time to do that. So the number 3 is really about empowering arts organizations to reimagine what it means to be sustainable. So as you can imagine, coming to Calgary from the United States, the funding model is completely different. In the United States, we are at risk of being perhaps overly dependent on the private sector, whereas here the perception might be that we are overly dependent on the public sector. And I think one of the things that we want to come out of this is to be able to diversify our revenue streams as much as possible so that when pandemics do occur, we are not, the rug is not pulled out from under us. So one of the ways in which Arts Commons is attempting to tackle this is by the development of what we're calling the Arts Commons Transformation Project, which is an expansion and modernization campaign which consists of building a new extension to our facility, doubling our square footage almost, because our facility has been operating at capacity literally since the year we opened in 1985. And so what it would do a couple of different things. It would allow us to monetize and commercialize activities in a way that then allows us to bring that money back into our local economy, back into our local residential companies. As you know very well, Arts Commons, much like Lincoln Center, is based on this idea of an ecosystem where we need to be talking about economies of scale. We need to be talking about shared resources. And a performing arts center like Arts Commons allows organizations like Theatre Calgary and the Calgary Philharmonic and so many other community-based companies to access world-class venues, tap into audiences at a fraction of the cost of what it would normally be. But that business model requires Arts Commons to sustain that practice. So the ability to increase our square footage allows us to generate more commercially based earned revenue to then pour back into our into our ecosystem. The only last thing I'll say on that is this has been a project that's been in the works for many, many years, but there has been a unique opportunity right now, given the investment in infrastructure, to revisit this. This in the near term would create over 3,000 jobs in construction, would add hundreds of millions of dollars to Alberta's GDP in a time when the arts sector is normally seen as hemorrhaging money. This is an opportunity for the arts sector to give back in times of crisis. We have launched the RFP for design consultants around the world and locally. And what we are hearing is that people are chomping at the bits to work on this because it would be the world's first performing arts center to be designed since COVID hit, and would be a manifestation of what we are learning in terms of HVAC, in terms of security, in terms of health, in terms of how people navigate through space, and what it means to have a flexible performance and cultural center. So it's a great opportunity, and the time, it's one of the silver linings that has come out of this for us. And ultimately, in the long run, it will lessen our dependency on government funding because we will have the ability to monetize and activate this new building and our increased square footage in brand new ways.
Thank you. I really appreciate the forward thinking you're looking at. If there was one other thing that you would ask from the federal government, what would it be?
So the federal government, as I mentioned earlier, we have confirmed pledges from our municipal and provincial governments. We have a pledge that was made last year by the federal government of $80 million, and we are now in conversation with the infrastructure ministry to see if that pledge can come to fruition. And so I would ask this committee for your support and advocacy as we continue those conversations at the federal level so that we can break ground as early as 2022.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Madame Bessette, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Bessette for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses for being with us today. My questions will be for Mr. Antunes. I understand the position of participation. I have a daughter who has been practicing sports. I was doing cross-country skiing since 2 years. So as an MP, it's important for me to continue exercising even every day in order to better carry out my duties and feel healthy. So that's very important for me. A lot of sports are participated in the 10 organizations. Like in the natural environment parks, you can do some walking. There is an increase of use, so there is greater degradation of these paths, and they have partially had to shut down during the week to allow some recovery time. My question, how do these community organizations, how are they faring in this COVID atmosphere? How can we better assist them?
COVID has impacted our lifestyles. We're in front of screens now more than we ever have before. And so we need to be a bit more purposeful in our physical activity, whereas before, a lot of our day-to-day physical activity was just generated by, walking to and from the bus stop or going out for lunch and grabbing a sandwich. And so we need to be more purposeful. In saying that, I think we need to also support Canadians with this notion that physical activity, yes, you could visit a facility, enroll in a program, but you can be physically active just by going outside and going for a walk. And we need to encourage Canadians to be thinking about physical activity as a way to support their mental health and their other day-to-day issues. Our platform as an organization is everything gets better when you get active. And we really need to have Canadians think about physical activity, not something you put on a to-do list, but something that is just incorporated as part of your everyday lifestyle. With respect to community organizations, they are a key partner of ours. So in saying that people can just go outside, obviously if people want to participate in sport, as an example, to be physically active, they need to enroll in a particular program, which many of them have been suspended or closed as a result of the pandemic. we need to support these local community organizations to be able to continue to outreach and engage Canadians in a responsible and safe way. Most of the emergency relief funding that has been provided has benefited national and some provincial organizations, but it's not filtered down into the local organizations. And so part of our proposal is to support these local community organizations, many of which are volunteer-based and volunteer-run. But giving them money will be helpful, but we're positioning that support in the context of a national campaign around this Canada Moves month in June, so that they can utilize and leverage that kind of focal point as a way to re-engage people within their local programming.
Thank you very much. On sait qu'il y a une différence.
Thank you. We know there is a difference between sports and physical activities. Sports is a federated thing like football, badminton, whereas the physical activity is done informally, as you said earlier, just simply going out to walk or ski. We must find ways to boost physical activity amongst Canadians. You raised that. In the context of a recovery, what is the new normal in terms of physical activity? And do you think there will soon be an increase in demand?
I mean, that's our organization's whole wish, is that we would have an increase in demand of programming. But as I said before, I think people have been so preoccupied with, keeping their jobs and the economic impact on their families' livelihoods, that physical activity hasn't been top of mind. And yet, physical activity is one thing they could do to help mitigate some of that stress and that anxiety that COVID is impacting on their lives. And so we really need to get people to think about physical activity as a mechanism to support their lifestyle, as opposed to, as I said, putting it just on a to-do list. I think engaging in sport is very important as well. There are other benefits to engaging in organized sport beyond being physically active. Cooperation, learning how to compete. So those are things that are very important as well. And as I mentioned, I think it's not a one or the other. We need to support Canadians' intentions to lead an active, healthy lifestyle to help manage and cope with their mental health. But we need to provide opportunities in local communities for them to engage in more community-based sporting programs. Both have merit.
Thank you very much. My last question, I think I still have a little bit of time. Encore sur la relance.
Still on the recovery, these community organizations, are they ready to face this? How can we support more these organizations as we can see that there's a change in the habits of Canadians?
These local organizations. One is to ensure that we have some consistent messaging across the country, and that's where our public education campaign recommendation comes in. Every jurisdiction has used different guidelines or have communicated the guidelines in different ways. So quite frankly, Canadians are confused to some extent on what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, what programs they can enroll in, how best to enroll in these programs and still be safe and abide by public health guidelines. So, there's some work to do to provide some leadership and continuity around messaging to ensure that Canadians understand what they can and can't do. I think the second thing, as I mentioned, is to support these local organizations. One of the key aspects is that they're dependent upon registration fees for their livelihood. Those registration fees have obviously dried up. And so we need to re-engage Canadians in those programs. And so I think Canadians will be a little bit more resistant because of being isolated for such a long time to go back and register in those programs. And so our recommendation is to create this platform this month where we can really use that as a way to re-engage and spark interest in local programming again. So providing financial support to allow local organizations to provide free programming for the entire month, to be able to invite people back into their programming.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Monsieur Champoux.
Champoux. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming before the committee today. I'll give Mr. Antunes an opportunity to catch his breath, and then I'll come back and have some questions for you. But first of all, Mr. Julien, I have to raise the fact that you are discussing with the organization this issue of the supplement, the subsidy in the 2019 budget that will expire in in 2021. It's unanimous. The industry is asking unanimously that this additional funding be made permanent to avoid coming back to the 2008 funding levels. Have you raised this issue with your counterparts or with people in the government? And what are their answers? What messages are you hearing when you raise the importance of that? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, certainly. We have raised this issue on several occasions with the public servants and Canadian Heritage and people from Minister Guilbeault's office. We have heard some favorable responses from Minister Guilbeault, but we are still waiting for information to know what exactly the sector can expect. On March 31st, that's all I can provide you as an answer. We are still waiting for a signal on what will happen with those programs. We must remember that in the case of Canadian Fund for Culture, it was an increase since 2008. So the additional funding that was granted was only an extension or an improvement of the program to make it to a level similar to where it was when it was created in 2001. In 2019, there was no talk of increasing significantly. It was rather an indexing. So when the recovery will take effect, I think it's important to consider these programs as tools that could move things forward. And we have to think of providing additional funding. Thank you, Mr. Julien. So to come back to Mr. Antunes, your organization, Participation, was part of the lives of all Quebecers and Canadians since the 70s. We remember these headlines or these ads that urged people to go out, get involved in physical activity. It wasn't so much about performance. That was a positive spirit. At that time, Participation compared the Canadian, of a 30-year-old Canadian, with a Swede of 60 years old. So does that mean that Swedes were not healthy compared to Canadians, or was it the reverse that was true? So I think considering the activity of your organization, we can have a general idea, but I would like to know, where are we today? Is it still a valid comparison, or have our situation improved?
6-year-old Swede was at the same level of health as a 30-year-old Canadian, and implying that Canadians weren't as healthy or as active as the Swedes. I would say that the situation is still true. Canada ranks, not at the bottom, but certainly closer to the bottom compared to other countries with respect to physical activity. We do work with other countries when we look at children and youth physical activity. And there are some countries that do things much better than we do, and we do certain things better than other countries. But this is a global issue. Globally, people are just not as active as they need to be to experience health benefits. So Canada is not alone in that regard, but certainly our country can and should do more to get Canadians more physically active, not only for just the benefits of movement, but as I mentioned, as a way of coping with some of the mental health issues that we're all struggling with as a result of COVID.
Au début de la pandémie, dans la première vague,
at the start of the first wave, we tried to buy bikes. It's much harder this time. Trying to buy cross-country ski equipment, bicycles, you have to get up early because it's almost impossible to find the equipment. Do you think your organization could play a role in coming up with other activities, other ways of maybe taking advantage of this renewed interest in physical activity? Do you have a game plan for that?
We do, and in fact, we've actually used technology as a way to communicate, as many other organizations are doing. So we've created an app called the Participation app, and through the app, we are delivering supports and practical strategies on what Canadians can do to be physically active. We just actually finished off a month-long challenge called the Great Big Move, where we encourage Canadians to get into groups virtually to be physically active, accumulate their physical activity, and by doing so, you could unlock certain milestones that actually exposed you to the various aspects of Canada and celebrating all of what Canada has to offer from a physical activity perspective. So there are innovative ways that we are looking at using technology to be able to get people into groups. That's one of the key things that has been missing, is that people are now isolated, and physical activity is very much something that if you're doing with someone else or in a group, you're a lot more accountable to be doing it. And we've kind of lost that. We lost that at the local gym. We're not going to that with our friends anymore. And so we're creating ways to engage virtual groups through physical activity in fun ways. But again, as I mentioned, our two recommendations include a national public education campaign, because we still need to be reminded. And yes, there are still some of us that are trying to buy exercise bikes, but the vast majority of Canadians just don't have physical activity on their radar, and they don't see the opportunity to use physical activity as a way to cope with some of the stresses that they're encountering. So we need to continue to communicate, to engage and educate, and provide practical strategies to help Canadians and their families to be more physically active. And as I said, the second recommendation is to creatively look at a national unity opportunity, and hopefully by June 2021 we'll be in a position to do that, where we're engaging communities to support individuals of being physically active. So we want Canadians to want to be physically active, to understand the benefits, and then we want communities to be able to support those activities as well.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur. Ms. McPherson, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses today. It's been very interesting to listen to you. And I, of course, want to give congratulations to Mr. Artunas. 50 years is a remarkable thing. I can tell you that when I was in grade 6, I was the flexed arm hang champion at Brander Gardens Elementary School in Edmonton. And I do have some questions for you. One of my concerns is the impact that multiple levels of funding disappearing will have on the sports sector in our communities. So I know in Edmonton, for example, the municipality, the city of Edmonton, is cutting funding and grants for a lot of organizations that depend on those grants. Can you talk about the impact of the lack of funding through a variety of different mechanisms that we've seen during COVID-19?
Well, I mean, it's a comprehensive issue, because as I mentioned, our sector is made up of national organizations, provincial, territorial, and municipal, and we all work. We all depend upon one another to actually support Canadians to be active and to participate in sport. And so, if one piece of the sector kind of falls, then the whole system is compromised. Much of the emergency relief programs that have been available have been supporting national organizations like Participaction, and we are obviously very grateful. But when it comes to down to at the local level, that money has not filtered down. In fact, as you mentioned, in many cases, governments are cutting because they have to redirect resources to other areas. That will put a significant pressure on the whole system. Because as I mentioned, there's over 33,000 organizations, 71% of which are local community organizations. And I should also say that 73% of all of those community organizations are volunteer run. And so they don't have large staffs to be able to find money or to go to sponsorship. And so if those organizations don't get the type of support that they need to sustain ongoing programming, they'll likely close and close up shop, which means then that we won't have those local organizations offering up programs for Canadians to be able to participate in. Whether that's joining a hockey league or a soccer club, those programs may just disappear in our local communities. So not only does it have an impact on our ability to participate in physical activity and sport as Canadians, it really impacts the cultural social fabric of Canada that these organizations contribute to.
Thank you. Well, and similar to Madam Bissett, I'm a mother, and my two children are both athletes. And one of the things that I'm realizing, all of the things that you say really resonate. That there is more screen time. It is difficult to keep that going. That there's some other deep impacts. My children are both at home now. Their school has gone to online learning. So there is no physical education happening within the schools either. So we've lost that piece. My children both do sports, and so they also have lost their ability to train with their clubs and with their teams. Is there any plan to support sort of the coaches, the trainers, all of those pieces of this puzzle that provide training and are now required? You know, my daughter does her classes, her swim training in her bedroom right now. Is there ways that we can support those coaches, those trainers, those individual leaders?
Certainly, and my colleagues in the sports system would be better qualified to kind of give you a more detailed response, and someone from the sports sector meet with you. But many of the national sport organizations have developed strategies to support their programming, whether that be virtually or otherwise. And I would say that that's where those discussions are happening at the National Sport Organization table, which I'm not really that part of. I'm more on the participation side, but certainly those discussions are happening. Those organizations are committed to ensuring that the right supports are put in place to enable children, youth, and adults to continue to participate in sport at the level that they've been participating in the past.
Mm-hmm. And then one final question I have for you, actually, if you could speak a little bit, you talked a bit about Sweden, of course, and what we've seen in Canadians not being active and not participating. What have you learned, I guess, from other organizations around the world? How are other countries dealing with this? Because this is not something that would be unique to Canada. This would be something that would be international in scope.
It's certainly not unique to Canada, and but at the same time, I think the countries that are doing well, to be very frank and honest with you, have significant government support, both from a policy perspective and an investment perspective. We don't have that in Canada, at least not from a policy perspective. We don't value the role that physical activity plays in our society the way some other countries do. Australia in particular just recently developed a whole new strategy with significant investment around re-engaging their citizens back in physical activity and sport. I would say that that's one thing that we need is a higher priority and emphasis and focus on the role that sport and physical activity plays in our country, both from a health perspective, but also from a social engagement perspective. What we've learned, though, that some of the countries that are doing well actually have implemented physical activity as part of more lifestyle behaviors, like active transportation has been a big focus. Mm-hmm. And this is a huge opportunity actually for us, because many of our cities have now dedicated biking lanes or walking paths. And that's something that we need to ensure that we continue to support and build, as opposed to taking them down when the crisis is over. To really ensure that our cities and our places of where we work and live are supportive and conducive to being physically active.
Thank you so much. Very interesting, and I'm sure I'm out of time.
I'm afraid you are, but before we leave, Ms. McPherson, I have a point of clarification that we have to clear up right now. You were the hanging flex. How does that go again?
Arm hang.
Flex arm hang champion.
That's right.
I used to be pretty good at that myself, but I was so I was not particularly
way to get physically active in our committee.
There you go. I wasn't particularly athletic. It was just I'm so short. It was too much of a distance to the ground for me to let go. But nevertheless, congratulations on your title. Up next, we have Mr. Waugh for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to ask Mr. Antunes one question. Earlier this month, the YMCA closed 2 facilities in the city of Regina. I used to be on the YMCA Saskatoon board, and I can tell you the YMCA deals with the most vulnerable people in our communities. Now Regina has closed 2. They have only 1 left in a fairly good neighborhood, I might add, but Regina has closed 1 on the east side, 1 on the downtown. And this is a major catastrophe, I would think, for YMCAs across the country. And we are seeing it here now with Regina closing 2 of their 3 locations in the city of Regina. Your comments on that?
Oh, it's devastating. And I think we are concerned that will continue with YMCAs, with local sport clubs, recreation, community centers. As I mentioned, many of these organizations are dependent upon registration fees of their programs to sustain their operations. And with us not registering in those programs for such a long time, it has a significant economic impact on their organizations, which prevent them from operating. They'll have a significant impact, as I mentioned, not only on our ability to access local programming to be physically active, but the contributions well beyond physical activity to the social issues faced in communities and underrepresented groups, as you mentioned, is critical. And I fear that COVID will reshape our SPAR sector landscape in the future, which will look very, very differently, and that will be very, very unfortunate if that's the case.
I should mention the Regina Marlin swim team. Their home was downtown in Regina at the YMCA, and now they've lost that. So there's another catastrophe. A really good swim club in this province now looking for a new home because of the closure of the YMCA. But I'm going to move on. Mr. Julian, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for sending it out before. Those numbers are not surprising that you, on the labor force survey, where the arts, entertainment, recreation sector has lost 36,000 plus jobs in October. Performing arts, of course, spectator sports and related industries lost 4,800 more in October. So, you know, as we go on with COVID, those are startling numbers. And maybe just talk about that, because you had a really good presentation. Unfortunately, all the arrows pointed down. They were all red. And I think it's going to take a long time before your organization and others in this country to turn this around. But I just wanted to thank you for the survey, and I want you to comment on the numbers that you produced here in front of the committee today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to answer to the member by first providing a bit of context on these statistics. So the labor force survey provides information on employed people, and to be deemed employed, whether you're on payroll or you're self-employed, if you worked any number of hours during the reporting period, you count as employed. Our sector is one in which there are many, many freelance workers. So what you're actually seeing is a more positive outlook on reality by virtue of the fact that we have many self-employed workers who would have been deemed employed just because they worked a few hours during the reporting period. So in terms of labor, one of the big problem there is that we are facing a significant exodus of the workforce to other parts of the economy. So when the activities finally resume, our organizations will have to rehire. So they will have to train their staff. So this was actually, it's an opportunity to do things differently. The kinds of skills that will be required in 2021 and beyond are arguably different kinds of skills than those that were needed even 10 years ago. So in terms of professional development training that can be provided to staff and entry-level training, this is an opportunity to provide new digital skills to our staff, but also to ensure that as we rehire, that equity principles are also observed. It's an opportunity to make this workforce more representative of the makeup of the Canadian population.
Well said. Thank you very much, Mr. Julian. And Chair, back to you as my 5 minutes is up.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. Yes, you're just 3 seconds shy. Sign of a former broadcaster, indeed. Now we go to the final question for the Liberals. I have 2 names, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Van Coverton. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the time. So, Mr. Lewis, I'll let you know when your 2.5 minutes, around about 2.5 is done. So, Mr. Lewis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. And I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, for your advocacy, your testimony. And I would like to focus my time on Mr. Julian, because I also read the report you had. It was very informative and something I haven't heard discussed much. We talk about investments in infrastructure, investments in careers. I appreciate how you referred to it as the entire chain of jobs in the arts sector. You mentioned that the support for the wage subsidy, rent subsidy in the CERB, the support that they've provided and the need to continue that. But I wanted to, we talk about the supply side, presenters, festivals, and artists, concert promoters. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on the demand side, what ways we could help support increasing the demand for the arts as we come out of this, maybe partnerships with different levels of government or with patrons, with supporters. Can you share some ideas or some best practices about how we can focus and support enhancing the demand side of the arts? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very important and relevant question. We can safely presume that the behavior of consumers will be different after the pandemic. It had already evolved significantly over recent years, partly due to the consumption of culture online. So it will continue to evolve. So there will be a need to assist the sector in making better meaning of these changes in behaviors. In terms of how we can also better understand the demand, that there is one initiative that is undergoing in Montreal called CHPC. They are, for example, looking at consumer data, what people buy, when, and for, going quite granular to better understand the demand and then make better recommendations. There is also a need for investment into the development of a more data-centric approach to both supply and demand. Nowadays, people find their cultural activities using digital devices. And those digital devices, their job is to match information, data about the offer with the supply, with data on the demand. So we need to become more adept at representing our information as data that those machines can then use to make better recommendations to their users.
Thank you, Mr. Joni. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Van Coverden. It's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's really nice to be here on Heritage Committee, and my questions will be for Mr. Antunes. I'm a big fan of your work and a big fan of your organization. J'ai le app sur ma téléphone.
I have the app on my phone, and I'm very proud to share that with my colleague, Mr. Champoux.
So we'll be doing push-ups after the meeting. Mr. Antunes, I'm really excited to support Canada Moves Month in any way that I can, and to celebrate Participaction's 50th anniversary together with Canadians. I would love to hear more about removing the barrier of affordability for 2,500 community organizations who would get grants. I'd also like to highlight that we announced $14 million for community sport organizations on Friday. Not the best time of the week to share really good news, but it is good news. It is the remainder that Mr. Shields, I believe it was Mr. Shields referenced earlier. So my question is, with respect to the 60% of organizations who have not been able to access the supports, how can we broaden eligibility? And how can we support Canada Moves Month and hopefully make 2021 Canada Moves Year, because we both know that it's incredibly necessary and important?
Well, thank you for the question. There's much to do. One kind of focused opportunity, as we mentioned, is to declare June as Canada Moves Month. And our idea was that we're already implementing a community engagement initiative called the Participation Community Better Challenge, which is trying to find the most active communities across the country. That initiative is already being funded and invested by the Government of Canada. And so what we'd like to do is leverage that opportunity to provide up to $10,000 grants to up to 2,500 organizations. So $25 million commitment, one-time commitment, to be able to resource those local organizations to kickstart, if you will, re-engagement in their local programming. And so what we would do is leverage the opportunity that we're already in market, if you will, with communities. And so now let's just resource those local organizations to be able to actively participate, attract, and engage people in those local programs as part of the Participation Community Better Challenge. Our expectation is that the benefits of that kickstart will be far-reaching, well beyond June and our Community Better Challenge, that those organizations now will have the ability to continue to re-engage local community members in their programming.
And if I could just a quick follow-up. I'm just curious about the 60% of organizations that do not have access. How can we broaden eligibility? What's the barrier to access?
Well, the barrier to access is, we actually work with a lot of them. We have about 10,000 local organizations that we work with on an ongoing basis. The challenge is a lot of those organizations are volunteer-based. They're small organizations, and they may not have the resources to be able to go out and fill up applications or get corporate sponsorship. All of the programming that we do, we usually have micro grants associated with our programming to provide very support to those local organizations to be able to reduce barriers of participation. This will be a significant influx of revenue that these organizations may not be eligible to receive in any other way. So my answer, I guess, would be the eligibility would be based on organizations that are connected already to our organization that are delivering programming. We would obviously have committees in place to look at criteria. Underrepresented and equity-seeking groups would be part of that. And then we would provide those grants, and they would implement those programs and report back.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We're a little over time, but of course, very important subject. Thank you to our witnesses who came. Alex Sarian from Arts Commons. We had Frederick Julian from the Canadian Association for the Performing Arts. Ilio Antunes from Participaction, who taught even me to now have a Participaction app. I suggest you download one near an app store near you. There you go. Okay, folks, we'll see you again this coming Friday for the same subject. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.